Okay. So welcome back to the Defiant Spirit. My guest in my virtual studio, at least if you're looking, needs no introduction, but if you're listening, you can't see, but I am blessed to have with me in this virtual studio, my good friend, Julie Mouse. Hi, Julie.
Hi, B. Thanks for having me again.
Eighth time is a charm. We are working our way through the Enneagram. Anybody who's just joining us over the past, I would say it's 8 weeks, but it's not. It's been a few months. We got a couple snags in there, curveballs thrown at us, and so we delayed, but we are back by popular demand, Julie Mouse and myself, to offer you Expand the Space, which is our exploration of the Enneagram with my area of expertise, the Enneagram, and Julia's dual area of expertise, Enneagram and mindfulness practice. And so we've been taking this idea of Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in our space lies our power to choose our response. And so we've been taking that space in between stimulus and response, between things happening to us and us reacting. Can we expand that space? Can we become mindful? And using the Enneagram as our roadmap for how to become mindful, and also to look at each Enneagram type's particular opportunities and challenges, blessing and curses, light and darkness when it comes to mindfulness. All right, that's an overview. Now on to everybody's least favorite, Enneagram 8.
Oh, not least favorite.
I don't know, Julie. I do the pop quiz all the time. If you were to reincarnate and you got to choose your Enneagram type, which one would you come back at as? And to date, not one single person has said Enneagram 8.
Well, I think I did.
You did?
I
Oh,
think so.
well, then you must be married to an 8.
Yeah, well, that's the truth. But honestly, I think being married to an 8 and seeing how the Enneagram completely changed our marriage was part of why I went into learning about the Enneagram. I'm so passionate about it, and specifically the 8, because I think the 8 is the most misunderstood on the whole Enneagram, because they get the label the 8 hole, and people get frustrated with them or call them names maybe because they're a lot of energy. But when you find out more about where the 8's intentions are, that it comes from a real place of love and caring, maybe the most on the Enneagram, you start to see it completely differently. And so the 8, I was most excited about this podcast because I feel like understanding that about the 8 gave me a lot of compassion, understanding, but even more so, my 8 husband, learning about the Enneagram really changed his ability to have more self-awareness. So
Good. All right. So we now have a new president of our fan club for the Enneagram 8s.
yeah,
It was
exactly.
it was a tough race, but we decided on you since you were the only one. Well, I think also partially it's because we 8s can take it. So, you don't say everybody's least favorite with the 2s, because you just don't say that with an Enneagram 2. So I think that there is part of that sort of, built into it, that we do have a toughness. It's probably a good segue into describing the 8 and defining the 8 for those who are new to the Enneagram. The Enneagram 8 is the challenger, called the boss, called the maverick, called anything else? Any other names?
Protector, leader.
Protector, defender. Yeah. So, you always get the same vibe with the 8. It's a tough cookie.
Yeah. Well, I think the 8 is the one that I can tell the easiest, because there's just an intensity you can almost feel when you're around someone who's an 8.
As long as, yes, and the more unhealthy an 8 is, the more obvious it is too. It's one of
Last
those.
night I was watching a 60-minute show on Pink. I don't know if you saw it recently.
I didn't.
It's just a recent episode. And I mean, I was like, is anyone going to tell her that she's an 8? I mean, she just is so out there with her intensity and her strength, and that being so important to her.
She's actually, she's one of my pictures in the Enneagram as an example of an 8. it's kind of hard sometimes to find female eights.
Mhm.
I think our society, either we don't um nurture eights, and so they don't have as many of them, or they go underground. They're not rewarded, I think, in the same ways or described in the same ways as male eights, unfortunately. But I see like disproportionate amount of twos, the helper, as women, and disproportionate amount of eights as men. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, well, our culture, maybe some of those women are in hiding because our culture tells women that they shouldn't be that way. The same woman acting aggressively and intensely gets called names that I'm not going to say right now, where a man kind of gets looked at as, oh, he's strong and he's a leader.
Yeah, it's true. And also, um, I do think a lot of the eights who are very unhealthy have made it hard for the rest of us eights to come out. I see this every time. I had to take Donald Trump, I think, off of my eight list on one of them because he just evokes so much emotion in people. We don't talk politics here. This is just a visceral reaction that so many people had. They couldn't get past it, and almost like they wouldn't allow themselves to be called an eight if somebody like that's an eight, or there's a lot of tyrants that are eights out there.
Right, right. They just see the comparison and then that's offensive. And I actually even see this with my husband, and part of the hard part of learning about the fact that you're so intense and that you can be too much for people and that people can feel like you're aggressive is that I mean, you're an eight, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but he says, like, I had no idea I was that intense. And when I learned that, at first I didn't believe it because because the energy comes from this deep caring. So if you don't know that you're too much for people and you know that your intention is truly like a heart comes from your heart place, it's kind of shocking for people to tell you, why are you being that way? Or you're too much for me, you're too aggressive. He would be like, what? I'm too aggressive? I'm trying to help you. And so it was really hard. But once he kind of entertained, well, maybe I am. I've had enough people tell me this. It was really life changing for him. Like, really, the ability to say, oh, if that's the case, then I want to work on that. I want to change that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think I've always known, maybe not always, but my conscious adult life, I've known that I was an eight. I know I'm intense because I've been in very visible positions where people would feel free to tell me that I'm intense or I'm too
Mhm.
much. But I can see a lot of eights not realizing that they're just experienced as too much, because whenever I'm counseling an eight and I say something to the effect of, do people accuse you of yelling even when you're not yelling? And like all the time, like I get told I'm like yelling and I'm not yelling, and because they don't always know that they vibrate at a higher level.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of energy. And because they tend to be leaders and maybe bosses in certain
Yeah,
work situations, I think not every eight is lucky enough to have someone who has told them. So not every eight is aware of that.
it's true. And I think it's one of the downfalls of some could have been great eights who just became destructive because they start surrounding themselves with echo chambers with yes men and women who just are acolytes, who just reinforce everything that person wants to hear. And you can see it. I mean, in my Enneagram system, you can just see a lot of these. Oh, they had so much energy and so much potential, and they just veered off to, off the eight path.
Well, I could see where it would be hurtful for an eight, because that piece where it comes from a deep caring, this intensity, I don't think they are intending to harm anyone in any way. And so if people don't tell them and just, give them, oh, you're such an eight hole or whatever, then I feel like an eight feels misunderstood. So why bother?
Yeah, and the other piece of it is eights. It's hard for me to feel if there's not an intensity level there. So I was telling Ariella these past 2 weeks since what happened in Israel. As an eight, I'm charged. I'm juiced, I'm energized. Because I talk to a lot of people, I counsel a ton of people who shut down. They're not eights. They go into, understandably, probably even a healthier place, but they go into this more contemplative space. Ariella is a four. She goes inwards and gets really dark and quiet. And I express, I go outwards. And
Mhm.
so I really got to be careful because I can look for that juice, that energy, fires to fight. I'm a better firefighter than I am day to day mundane stuff. And so
Right.
what can happen is if you don't get fiery and up in my face, up in my grill, I can't feel it. And so then I start weeding out people who don't want that, who can't stand that, who don't deserve that. And people start backing down. And then
Mhm.
you find yourself in a kind of a lonely place.
Right, because people have backed away because they can't take it.
And it doesn't mean I'm tough and strong. It just means I'm fiery and nobody wants to get burned. And so, I've had to learn how to pull back, to hold back, some of that intensity.
Well, and for the people out there listening who are in relationship with an eight, if you have enough trust with them and you can say, let them know, hey, I want to hear what you're saying. I want to listen to you, but it's a little much for me right now. Can you tone it down? And not every eight is aware enough to take that, but when they are, I find that there's like an aha, oh, okay, yeah, I want to continue this. They're capable of toning it down, but they're just not aware. And so for people who are listening who are in relationship with an eight, don't get mad at them. Don't blame them. This is just how they are. Instead, but ask them and let them know, like, hey, can you calm it down a little bit so we can keep talking? Because I want to hear what you have to say.
This is why one of the things eights have to do when they're in fight or flight, and it's usually fight, rarely is a flight, is to take flight, is to go on a walk, move. Eights, as you know, are gut. We're
Mhm.
reaction, we're gut types, we're instinct types. And what we do is, nines go away from their instincts. Ones don't trust their instincts, and eights over rely on their instincts. So I got to stop taking action. I got to get back into my body. It's almost like an out of body experience as an eight, where I'm just energy unbridled. And I got to get back into my body. And I can't do that unless I move. Usually for me, it's movement.
Yeah. Well, and since you brought that up, mindfulness is all about re-embodying, like paying attention to this energy. And the energy in innate, most of them describe it like you just did. There's this like intense energy coming out and it's going to go into action. That's what it does, unless you can find some kind of pause. And this is where the mindful pause, and that can be movement. It's a pause from the doing into a more something like yoga or a walk or some type of exercise, something where you're moving your body without taking action on whatever you're so intense about. And that helps the thinking center come on board so that you can figure out what's more logical here and access your heart.
And that's why it's not helpful for me as an eight to think about meditation in that moment. Meditation for me is something I can do, and I do it every morning, but I do it from a neutral space. But in order to get into a neutral, sane place, I've got to discharge physical energy, right? I've got to discharge it, and I've got to get it out because we eights, we just have too much of it. And
Mm.
so jogging for me and even walking has been a salvation. I never go wrong when I get into an argument with Ariella and I walk or I jog before we continue the conversation. I always go wrong when I continue the conversation without a pause, space between stimulus and response.
And then I'm just going to challenge you a little bit about the mindfulness, because meditation isn't all just about finding a neutral space. A lot of, especially specifically mindfulness, is about bringing your attention into the body. And so I think there's so much value for an eight to learn to feel that energy, because you can't always go for a run. You can't always get out and know and be able to do something with it in that moment. And what they can do is just put their attention on that sensation. And my husband sometimes has argued with me, well, when I put my attention there, Julie, it just gets bigger. And I'm like, yes, stay there. That's just you feeling that energy wanting to come out and do. And when you just stay there and with awareness of the sensation, it's going to move. Energy, emotion wants to move, and it will. And so the ability to practice when you can't get out for a run and you're in a moment where you feel this energy, to just watch it, and you almost shift to this curious awareness, like, wow, look at that intensity. No wonder why I get myself in trouble. I mean, that's a lot of energy. And if I can just stay with it, with just this awareness of the energy that's there, it will subside.
We're not disagreeing at all, because I agree with you on mindfulness. When I say meditation, that's why I do distinguish sometimes mindfulness meditation,
Yeah.
because meditation, is a stillness quieting process. Mindfulness is a paying attention. And so I can't quiet, I could potentially pay attention.
Right. You can't quiet the thoughts, but you can pay attention to the sensation in your body that's arising as a result of the thoughts.
For sure. Or
Yeah.
at least in theory. I mean,
Right.
I
In
should
theory.
be able to, but I oftentimes do have to.
Practice.
Yes, it is a practice. I just think that it's it's dangerous. We are one of the dangerous types. I've, gotten myself into real precarious situations because of my anger intensity at times. Do things, say things that you can't take back. And so the discharge is, in my experience, very real when you're in an extreme sort of, in your car, you have that red zone, like, you better back off the engine or it's going to blow here.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with, I have to catch myself. Sometimes I can get sucked into it because sometimes I feel like conversations with an 8 are like playing ping pong. Like I'll say something and the ball comes right back, and I say something, the ball gets hit right back, and I'll fall for it for a while, and then I'll be like, wait a second. This isn't a conversation. This is a battle. How did I get sucked into this?
So true. I find
And
myself.
I find that the 8 kind of likes it. There's like a grin on his face, like, oh, I'm just having fun.
It is fun until it's it's all fun and games until it's not.
Well, it's not. Exactly.
And it can go south really quickly with an 8. I mean, because we're part of the reactive triad too, right? So there's a reactionary, because 7s, for instance, can be intense,
Mm-hmm.
right? And 7s, like, even in my experience, are even wittier, and they're quicker on their feet. They like, in the back and forth, especially sort of locker room banter.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple 7s in my life who can really dish it out. But it's not as reactive. It's not as heated.
No, it's not. I'm smiling because I have two of my best friends are a 7 and an 8, and the two of them, when I'm with them as a threesome, they always have to like be conscious, because otherwise it's just like the two of them going at it, and I'm just in the background watching. Like I don't have time. I'll think of something to say, and then they've already said something else.
So
So
true. So true. So part of it comes, I mean, there's lots of reasons for this. And this podcast is as much for people who are, in relationship with an 8 as it is for the 8s, because it's important to know, as we always talk about, the why, the motivation. Where does it come from? It's one of the hallmarks, I think, of the Enneagram, that it doesn't just describe what we do or how we do it. It describes why we do it. And one of the core drivers for a why is control, right? 8, 9, and 1, the challenger, the reformer, no, sorry, the peacemaker and the reformer, are the control triad. Like, we all vie for control. Every human being does, but I think especially pronounced in that triad. But 8s are obvious about it. Like, we're just so bossy. That's why it's called the boss sometimes. But it's coming from a place of control. And what's control coming from? A fear, right? That fear that if I don't control this, it's going to go south. I'm going to be found out. I'm going to be exposed. We're going to get hurt, a vulnerability.
it's even as small an example as sometimes my good Katie, who also works with us, says that if she feels like if she's at a dinner table, if she doesn't keep the conversation going, she has this belief that like we'll all be sitting there not talking.
Right.
Like there's that pressure that she better do that for everyone. And
So,
and that trickles into other areas of her life where she's like, well, if I don't, no one will. And it's this belief that I have to do everything or nobody will, which is a lot of pressure on an 8.
yeah, 8 and 2 in my experience, and not coincidental, they're sort of almost counter op, holding each other in balance on the either side of each other, is a control of a, let's say, God complex. But if I don't do it, nobody will.
Right. Oh yeah. 8 and 2. Right.
Yeah, there's this thing like if I don't do it, and so there's a lot of there's a lot of me, there's like nobody can do it. The truth is probably very few people can do it as well as the 8s and the 2s. And then we create this self-fulfilling prophecy because we overdo it. I do it so well and so fast. And that's the big difference between 8 and 2. I do it so fast, nobody even has a chance to. I'll
Yeah.
assign a task and then I'll do it for them. And then like, I didn't even have a chance to do it.
The 9 hasn't even figured out when she can do it yet.
A 9 is still considering whether or not she meant yes or no. And
Yeah.
8's like, here you go. Uh,
Exactly.
But there's an arrogance to that. There's an ego, right? Wayne Dyer says ego, edging God out, ego. And so we're edge God out because we just are afraid that we're vulnerable, we're exposed.
Right. And so this is where the beauty comes in. If you know that about the people who are 8s in your life, you can maybe look at them a different way. Stop your own reacting to 8's behavior and instead try and connect with them. Try and find out, is there something I can do to support you? Knowing that they're not going to ask for help. And I've gotten to the point where most of the time when I see an 8 not behaving well or being a little intense, I'm able to see that it comes from a fear of vulnerability and it's not intending to hurt.
So oftentimes whenever I'm dealing with a counterphobic 6, there's two types of 6s, the loyalist. There's a phobic and a counterphobic. Counterphobic, like it sounds, means goes against their fears. They look like 8s. And I've had multiple counterphobic 6s come to me. They look like 8s. They got the same piss and vinegar,
Mm-hmm.
but the motivation is very different because for all 6s, there's a underlying fear and anxiety. And when you're with an 8, you don't really get a fear or anxiety. It is much more of that being exposed versus an anxiousness. Have you had that experience?
Well, and with the 6, I feel like it's more tactical, like it's their intensity is on purpose in order to keep themselves safe or to get ahead of what could go wrong. And with an 8, they're just gunslingers. I mean, there is no intention around it. They just immediately reacted to what happened. Like, what do they say? There's ready, aim, fire, but the 8 is just basically fire, fire, fire,
Right.
and I don't think that there's this intention around at all, actually, that it just is shooting from the hip, not pausing, not being mindful.
Yellowstone. Have you watched Yellowstone?
Yes.
Yeah, we've talked
Well,
about it. Beth Dutton is like an 8 gone wrong. Like
yeah,
she's like everybody's worst nightmare 8 for our
yeah.
listeners. But I think her husband, I just blanked on his name, very short name, Rip. I think he's a counterphobic 6 because he doesn't have that same control. There's much more of an anxiousness under him, whereas
Right.
it's just fire.
Yeah. Exactly. I find a lot of counterphobic 6 think they're 8 or have a hard time figuring out whether they're an 8 or a 6, whereas the 8 pretty much knows.
The other thing about an 8, I don't think most people realize, I lived in Israel for a very long time, and I think they are counterphobic 6, but it feels a lot like 8s. So they're called the sabras if you're born in Israel. And a sabra is a cactus, and it's known to be prickly on the outside and soft on the inside. And it's a desert climate survival tactic. It's harsh, what we've been going through. It's a harsh climate, literally and figuratively. And so the cactus, there's a sweetness on the inside, but you got to be careful trying to get to it.
Well, yeah, and you were telling me that there aren't that many like famous 8s who are like really good, like the healthy side of 8. I don't know we have that many great role models for the
Yeah.
healthy side of 8. Can you think of any?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're like, bigger than life figures like Winston Churchill and Martin Luther King and
Yeah, but you were saying even them have dark
oh yeah.
sides. I
So
just
but
think our
yeah,
culture, I think we encourage eights to be more eight. I even find this with my husband, like people kind of love when he stands up and he isn't very nice to the bad guy. Everyone loves when he does that. And I'm like, hey, stop hiring him for that. That's not his best side. And I
it's
think we kind
true.
of hire the eights in our lives to do the dirty work, and then we blame them for being that way.
It's so true. There are very few eights that have no controversy. You can go through almost every other type and find pure examples. Whenever I was doing funerals as a rabbi, and people would say, "Oh, my loved one never said a bad word about anybody. Nobody ever said a bad word about them." I'm like, well, they weren't an eight. Like,
Mhm.
no rabbi or minister is going to say that at my funeral. Nobody ever said a
Well,
bad
I think
word
we
about
got
me.
to change that, B. I think because I think when the eights access their vulnerability, they're like no one else. And I just think they're not encouraged to access it enough. My favorite like TV view of this is in Ted Lasso, Roy Kent, who he was not the best guy all the time, but that scene where he does the press conference and in defense of the player who got in trouble, I remember thinking to myself, yeah, only Roy Kent could deliver that press conference because he could touch a place of vulnerability, having gone through that feeling himself, that no other character, even Ted, could do. And I just think that's an example of an eight in a place of vulnerability that we don't see enough.
It's so funny because when you said that, I remember the other scene of that TV show. Since
Yep, I know
this is
which
not for
one you're going to
children,
say.
where his girlfriend is satisfying herself, and he thinks she's watching porn, and he says, "What are you watching?" And he grabs the phone, and it's that press conference, and he was crying, and it was
Yep,
turning her on that he was being vulnerable, right? Which is
yep.
hilarious.
I mean, I'll even say to my husband, like, tell me something vulnerable. Like, that makes me attracted to you. And he's like, ew, gross.
So I just relate to it so much. Ariella says the same thing.
But I don't think our culture encourages eight to find that place enough. And when they do, I think they're amazing change agents, like the best in the whole Enneagram.
Well, this is a much larger conversation, which we will continue to have. But that is, if you think about our police force, if you think about the military, these are eight
Yeah,
institutions.
right.
And we expect our young men and now women to go off to war and then to come back and to turn it off,
Yeah.
right? Like, thank you, or officers, right? Thank you for going out into the danger streets, putting yourselves in harm's way for pennies, and then somehow turning it off like it's a flip switch. And we need you to be that eight tough on that one extreme, but we then expect you to turn it off completely. And life, people aren't a flip of a switch, and there are consequences, which is why there's such a high rate of suicide in both of those professions, because they don't know how to flip the switch. And sometimes we just ask too much of our eights or our eight institutions.
Yeah, I think when eights start paying attention to how much energy is in their body to constantly be in that fight mode, it's literally killing them because it's not healthy for your body. But also, I've heard that eights sometimes have sleeping problems. I know mine does, because when you have that intensity going all day long, it's hard to lie down at the end of the day and just shut it off.
Yes. And yet, this is the mixed message we give to eights in our society, because, we sometimes ask them not to shut it off. And that's why you look at some of the great eights like King, and I think actually Mother Teresa, the more I've studied her, I think she's actually an eight. I'll leave her in the two just because I can't go back and change it. But more than that, it's like she just embodies giving. So I get why we say that. But I've read a few things about her, and she was piss and vinegar. Like, don't get in her way. It's like she'll step on you, and a two can do that too. So I don't know.
Well, they have a line to each other. So maybe she was an eight in her two healthy space a lot, or two.
But you look at these people, and like we revere them for that, and then like they also did some damage. They weren't the nicest people to be around. Martin Luther King had his demons. If you look at the George Pattons and these other thank God for them. And then we also turn around and say, yeah, but they're imperfect. Of course they're imperfect. We're all imperfect. And that's part of the conversation, right? With
Mhm.
There's a saying in the Talmud, the taller the person, the longer the shadow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, when you put yourself out there a lot, you're gonna mess up. We all are, no matter what. And I do think some eights, that's a hard thing for them when they start to wake up and see their intensity and see the damage they've caused, and they feel bad about that.
Now, none of this is to excuse an eight, it's to explain an eight. We still have to take responsibility for our anger, for our intensity, and especially to anybody listening, and you can, attest to this. Once you have this understanding of your eight, maybe it's your child, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your friend, you can come from a place of a little more compassion, knowing they're fighting probably most of the time for you, not
Mhm.
against you. Rarely do I meet eights that it's all about the eight. They have a natural ability to, as Frankl calls it, self-transcend.
Yeah, if you have an eight in your life, pause and think about it. There's a certain feeling of safety you have when you're around an eight because they will take care of you.
Now, it doesn't mean they're actually effective, like me the other night, where it's like midnight and all of a sudden firecrackers are going off outside my son's window. But, we're all engrossed in the Hamas stuff. So he comes running into our room crying, saying they're outside because all he's heard is terrible news reports. So it was just a bunch of high school kids. But, anyways, it's like midnight. I'm in my boxer shorts. I'm out the front door with a baseball bat, running down the street, yelling swear words, right?
Yeah.
Middle-aged man, like I'm not that tough, but I just had to get my age just kicked in, and I'm running. It's like running down Alameda Street in my boxers, chasing kids who are lighting firecrackers. I'm like, uh-oh, like
Uh-oh.
between stimulus and response, there's no space.
Right. Oh my gosh. You had a moment of reality.
I had a moment of reality. I'm just lucky they didn't turn around and see who was chasing them. But yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think for an eight, it is hard when all that energy is going to pause. So, I mean, this is where I think mindfulness practice for an eight is actually a necessity, some type of practice where you practice turning in so that you can feel that intensity as it's rising, because you're already out the door with the bat if you don't find a way to calm down or get your head online first.
And if there's any teachers, if there's anybody out there who's around or raising young eights, it is such an important thing, especially boys, not only, but especially because if my teacher would have known the Enneagram, maybe she wouldn't have just kept yelling at me to sit down, face forward. She would have given me opportunities to discharge that energy,
Mhm.
right? Like my greatest teacher in elementary school, fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Pant, she put me in charge of the crossing guard. And all of a sudden I was like, I had duty, I had service, I could perform, and I became a better version of myself because maybe she knew the Enneagram and she said, oh, here's a young eight, give him some power, give him some authority, and then he'll sit down because he's discharged some of that energy.
And I love that story because the Enneagram isn't some like thing that just been invented or some like science. It's actually just human relation, and it tells you what sometimes you can just figure out intuitively. If you just when you see someone's behavior, if you instead of saying what the hell or why are they acting that way, if you're like, oh, maybe they're see the world a little differently than I do. Maybe there's a reason they act with that way. How can I help them? As opposed to there's something wrong with people.
Yeah, it's like, martial arts, Aikido or something. It's like you redirect their energy as opposed to fighting them because every time, unless they were an eight, and every time a teacher or an authority figure would fight me, I would fight back. I would, it's like trying to break a bronco as opposed to a new tactic, a new strategy, put me in charge of the safety patrol, and I become a better, you know, citizen, a better classmate.
Yes, yes. So pausing and instead of judging that behavior, like, how can we do this differently?
It's like telling, my wife who's a four, my son who's a four, stop feeling so deeply, right? It's like
Right,
that's ridiculous. If they could, they
right.
would. They can't. So I got to get them into their body and movement and whatever, but you can't. just yell at people. It's like, yelling at somebody who doesn't speak your language and just yelling louder. It's the
I
same
found
thing.
that if an eight trusts someone, they can hear. So gaining trust with an eight, I think, is really important. And then if you are trying to get them to behave a little differently, or trying to get them to be aware when they're in an intense space, you have to come at them in a way that's not, like you said, if you fight them, you're just going to get fight back. That's what they do. But if you come at them with this compassion, like, hey, are you okay? Is everything okay? What's going on here? Do you need a break? Or if they feel that you're being compassionate, I think it's almost like, how I said at the beginning of this podcast that I think the eights are the most obvious for me to tell because you can feel that intensity. I also think eights are, you can see the greatest shift when they become self-aware than any other number, because all of a sudden, instead of feeling this intensity, you can actually see their bodies relax, and there's this softness, and there's still that same, leadership quality, but without the forward-leaning intensity. And I think it's the most remarkable shift when they become aware, when they expand their space between stimulus and response, really, when they're able to pause there and soften.
Absolutely. I feel seen. I feel understood. Couple last thoughts on eight. A big one for eight is truth, right? And it doesn't mean we have a monopoly on it, nobody else does. It's more of an honesty, because what I can handle ugly truth. I don't like spin. I don't like being manhandled, like being or managed. That's the word, because there's a lie in it. And so an example of this is my kids mostly have learned that you better tell me the whole truth, because lying is acts of commission, saying things that are false, but acts of omission and leaving things out. And when there's acts of omission, when they're leaving out the full truth, I can feel it. I feel like I'm being managed. And I don't care what they've done. Like, they could do something terrible. Get there quickly, say it, speak the truth, tell me everything right now, and we'll deal with this. But it's almost like the oxygen is sucked out of our blood when we're dealing in the realm of being controlled or falsehood. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. Yeah. I see definitely, definitely the how it turns to a feeling of being controlled. I think that's exactly where it comes from, because I've heard that before, that it's not as important for an eight to be in control. It's just important for them not to be controlled by others, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it does.
And so that you equated those, the dishonesty being in some way, if they're trying to be manipulated, and it goes to that eight sense that everyone's out to get them a little bit, or that they might be betrayed. So that's why they have to keep this constant vigilance. And so it's almost like they have a radar looking for what's not true.
In a macro example, I shared a micro example. A macro example is this past week, as we're recording this, there was a devastating explosion in a hospital in Gaza. And right away, all of the spin, all of the half truths, all of the disinformation, all the lies came out. And as an eight, I'm telling you, that was the hardest thing for me during this whole time, because I smelled it, I saw it, I witnessed it, and I could just feel the whole world buying into this lie of withholding information. And we find out later that it was Islamic Jihad, and it came out of the Gaza Strip, and it was just hard to explain, but it zapped me of my energy watching this thing unfold. And that was a good example of I I feel controlled, or I'm being manipulated here.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you need to stay vigilant of who might betray you, you got to watch for that, right? If that's your story. And so interestingly, as you told that story, like, you sit up, your chest comes out a little bit, your shoulders get tense. I can feel the energy, right? And so mindfulness should be so easy for them. If you're thinking of mindfulness as awareness of body, because their body just viscerally reacts as they talk, their hands move, they're so animated. And then when they feel, their body is definitely reacting to how they feel.
Totally. It's a good tell. Terrible poker players, I imagine.
Oh yeah, probably. Probably.
So, any other final thoughts on the eight before we go into our meditation?
Um, hmm. Thinking if I left anything good out, there's so much good material there. I mostly just wanted to make sure in this podcast that people who are listening we're open to looking at that eight's intensity a different way and to having conversations with the eight of like, how can I help you? Because I've heard that what helps an eight is if they have people they trust that can give them kind of a signal when they're too much. And they don't trust a lot of people. I think most eights have on like maybe two hands the number of people they really trust. But if you can have a few one of those people in your home or at work who you say, hey, listen, turns out I don't have much awareness when I'm a little intense. Can you just give me a little sign or can you let me know? Because I know from my own husband that if I just either, make the heart sign or if it's in a public setting, just like put a hand on my leg or a hand on his leg or on his shoulder, it's like right away he's like, oh yeah, you're right, I am. And he's so appreciative of that. And I think if eights can have that relationship with people where they kind of ask for help, they can learn to rein it in a little bit and they can also elicit help from the people they love.
Yeah, that's really great advice. The other thing that I'll put out there is I've had quite a few eights who they're not sure if they're eights because even the way we describe it sounds like a bigger than life person extrovert. They're not necessarily extroverts. In fact, I think I'd probably say they're more introverted than extroverted, but our energy carries us outward. So even the most introverted eight is still able to get up in front of a group or, use their voice or get out there, but it doesn't mean we're extroverted. And that's been a bit of a confusion point for some eights I know who are more self-preservation eights, but they're even more five-ish. A couple of them have thought maybe they're fives and not eights because of the way we're describing it. But you know, I just say it again, eights have so much energy and probably the most energy on the Enneagram that we also have to go replenish. And
Mhm.
most eights need to disappear in some way, shape, or form to replenish. And I think that that's sort of the dance between extroversion, introversion for an eight.
Oh, I really like that. I find that too, that there's this introverted quality, but maybe it is that needing to go to their five. I call it my husband's five cave.
Yeah,
You need to go to your five cave and find, like let the intensity come down, find yourself again.
that's it. So I guess now you'll give us some real life strategies as we go into a mindfulness meditation. If you're just joining us, we've ended each of our podcasts with about 10 minutes or so of a guided meditation by Julie around this energy. And as we go into it, just a reminder of our sort of working thesis between stimulus and response. There is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. This is Expand Your Space for Enneagram 8, the Challenger.
So we're going to do a meditation that I think is helpful for eights. And specifically, like we talked about, it's really hard for eights to catch themselves in order to pause. I think they're great at pausing, but that intensity of when they're in a reactive space, like the story be told about running to get a bat, makes it very difficult. And so I think the more regular practice eights do with being in touch with their bodies and how the sensations in their bodies, the more likely they are to catch themselves so that they can pause, regroup, and then choose their response. And it tends to be a little softer. So they can bring that softening on board. They can get a little smaller, access their heart space. And then when they come from that place of vulnerability, I like to use the word magnanimous. And so that's just a little encouragement to be curious in this meditation. And it's all about bringing more awareness into sensations in your body. So we're going to start as we always do. If your legs are crossed, uncross them, place your feet flat on the floor and place your hands on your legs. And let's just take 2 deeper than normal breaths. Your eyes can either be lowered or closed. And really feel your shoulders softening back and down on the exhale. Let's bring our attention to the breath. And bring your awareness to your breath in your belly. So you're deep in the abdomen, feeling the expansion as you breathe in and the softening as you breathe out. And include with that maybe a feeling of your whole body on the exhale, just the softening and letting go. Expansion of the belly as you breathe in, a softening of the whole body as you breathe out. Now bring to mind a symbol of vulnerability for you. And for a lot of eights, this is a picture of themselves when they were younger, but it could be a picture of somebody else or an image, like a spiritual image, but anything that is a symbol of vulnerability or innocence for you. And try and see if you can actually get a 360 view of that image in your mind. Notice colors and textures of your image. And now bring some awareness into your body again, mostly the torso area, and notice what sensations you feel from thinking about this image for a little bit. Bring a curious awareness to how your body feels, because this is you with vulnerability on board. And now we're going to shift, and I want you to bring to mind something or someone that makes you want to armor up or shield up, something that maybe causes some anger, but that you feel like you need to protect yourself. You know, you might need to defend yourself or someone else. So just picture that situation or person in your mind. Actually allow yourself to feel any emotions that arise as a result of thinking this situation. And then bring your attention back into your body and notice what's here now. So maybe you start to feel that 8 energy of tingling, of wanting to move into action. What are you noticing? And just like with a vulnerable feeling, get to know this sensation, get to know how your body reacts when you think of armoring up or defending. And now let's bring your image back to your vulnerability image, or your image of innocence, the one you used earlier. Bring your attention to that image one more time. And maybe popcorn back and forth to how does my body feel when I'm thinking of this image? Thinking about the image again, bringing your attention up to the image and then back down to your body, creating some awareness of maybe the shift in energy from when you were visualizing the difficult situation or person. Now I invite you to let go of the image and bring your attention back to your abdomen where we started. So just following the rise of your belly as you breathe in, and then a softening of the whole body as you breathe out. even just this awareness of the sensation of your breath can create a shift in the body for an 8. Just a couple of breaths where you notice the sensation and notice a softening in your body. Get to know what that feels like. And we'll do one more breath. Letting go on the exhale. And then as you're ready, you can raise your eyes and soften your posture. And maybe just notice how you feel for a second before turning off the podcast and moving on to the next thing. I think there's so much incredible power in very short practice like this, especially for 8s, because when they can bring that vulnerability on board, like I said, I do believe they're magnanimous.
Amazing. Thank you. Julie Mouse, better than a jog.
I like that. I like that.
That's going on our website. And if you want to find our website, you can go to mindfulmouse, MAUS.com, where you can learn more about Julie, or you can go over to my website, definespirit.org, under the business page, where Julie, myself, and our friend Katie work together to bring the Enneagram and mindfulness practice into the corporate world, business, organizational settings. So we would love to hear from you. Thank you as always, my friend. And 8 down, 1 to go. The last but not the least, Enneagram 9, next podcast.
Thanks, B.
Thanks so much, Julie.